What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Home Field Podcast. So, for today's episode, it's just going to be me. We're going to be doing it solo today. Kevin was pretty busy today preparing to move to his apartment later this week. So, I imagine he'll probably be taking the next few days to get that squared away with. Hopefully, we can get him on an episode later in the week. Kevin and I will probably work that out in the next day or two. But for this one, it'll just be me. But we've got a lot to go over today. First things first, we'll go over the unfortunate and untimely death of Vincent Jackson. And then after that, we'll go over the Anthony Davis news. He re-aggravated his Achilles injury against Denver the other day. He's probably going to be out for the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we'll talk about how his injury affects the Lakers' title chances this year. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the trade rumors circulating around Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin. And then we'll wrap it up with a small conversation about Patrick Mahomes and how it's too premature to put him in this GOAT conversation now and probably even before the Super Bowl that took place last week. But like I said, we'll go over the untimely and unfortunate death of former All-Pro Vincent Jackson. He was found dead in a hotel room at a Homewood Suites in Brandon, Florida. And this hotel, I drive past every single day when I go to and from work. And it's right off the highway. There's an exit that goes to Brandon, and if you make a right off the exit, the hotel is right to your left, and it's right next to a Bass Pro and a Dave & Buster. So I know exactly where this hotel room is, or this hotel is, and I didn't notice anything odd or peculiar when I was driving past it yesterday. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention to it, but yeah, police found him dead in his hotel room there. And I'm not going to go too much into his death because details are still coming out. Obviously, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department, they're doing their investigation. They'll probably wrap that up in a couple of days from now. But the only thing that I really took away from the small report that they were able to come together with was that apparently he did not die of any trauma. So obviously we'll probably find out more later in the week, but it's really unfortunate. It's just really sad to hear of his passing. He was only 38 years old. He had just retired from football just a few years ago, and it didn't seem like to me that he was dealing with any sort of health issues or any mental issues at the time, but it's just really shocking to hear that he has passed away at such a young age. But I want to go over some of the highlights of his career. He had a fantastic career in the NFL, played in the league for over a decade, played most of his time with the Chargers, and then finished his career with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But he really burst onto the scene in 2008 with the Chargers. I mean, in that season alone, he had about 60 catches, but the impressive part that went along with it was the fact that he had 1,100 receiving yards, which means he was averaging somewhere in between 18 to 20 yards per reception, which is just absolutely nuts. And then he added 7 touchdowns to go along with it. And then he continued to play with the Chargers for a few years after, was extremely productive for them, ends up going to Tampa, I believe, in 2012, and has an impressive start to his time in Tampa. I believe he was very useful for them in the first 2 to 3 years of his career with Tampa. Still was producing at a high level, getting 1,000-yard receiving marks, I believe, in the first 2 years he was there, and then he ended up finishing his career retiring, I believe, in like 2015-2016 season. So, I mean, all in all, an impressive career. Had over 500 career receiving, had 500 career catches, finished with just over 9,000 receiving yards. A solid receiver from the mid-2000s up until, I want to say, the early 2010s, the mid-2010s. And not only that, when he was playing with the Buccaneers, I remember there was one game in particular where he had a monster of a game, ended up setting the Buccaneers single game receiving record, had 216 yards against the Saints. And if I remember right, that was the game where he ended up getting a 95-yard reception and ended up getting tackled around the 1-yard line by Malcolm Jenkins. It would have been really cool to see him score that touchdown, but Malcolm Jenkins ended up chasing him down and tackling him around the 1-yard line. And there's one thing that I want to focus on with Vincent Jackson and how it relates to when he was possibly going to go to the Patriots. So Around 2010, there was a time where Vincent Jackson may have gone to the Patriots to fill the void of Randy Moss being traded from New England. Randy Moss was traded to the Minnesota Vikings in like week 3 or week 4 of the 2010 season, and there were legitimate rumors that Vincent Jackson may have been going to New England to bolster New England's offense. And I remember I would either look on my phone or I would look on my laptop. I would just search Vincent Jackson rumors or Vincent Jackson Patriots in Google search bar, and then just look up all of the news pertaining to Vincent Jackson possibly going to the Patriots. I didn't have Twitter at the time yet, and I think back then Twitter was just in its infancy, so I don't think a lot of people knew about it yet. But if I had Twitter, I would have been just constantly on that looking for possible trade scenarios of him going to New England. Obviously, it didn't pan out that way. He ended up staying with San Diego for, I believe, 2 to 3 more seasons, and then went to Tampa after that. But look, just to kind of wrap up Vincent Jackson and his impact, look, I know he spent a lot of time in the community helping out military veterans, and not only that, military families as well through his foundation, not just in the Tampa area, but around the country as well. So I know that the NFL community will definitely miss him and his presence. He's been a solid role model for the NFL, and it's just really sad and unfortunate to hear about his passing. And it's crazy. He was only 38 years old, and just didn't seem like he was really dealing with anything significant, either physically or psychologically. It's just really unfortunate. And I know Kevin, if he were here, he would say similar things about Vincent Jackson. So just rest in peace to Vincent Jackson, and I just hope that his family can find some sort of comfort in these next couple days, because they're going to need all the support that they're going to need over these next few weeks, because it is going to be a tough thing to deal with his absence moving forward. But with that said, we'll move on to Anthony Davis. I know that's not the best way to start the episode, but I wanted to at least touch on Vincent Jackson and his impact across the league and across the country after his passing. But we'll move on to Anthony Davis. So Anthony Davis, he re-aggravated his Achilles injury against the Denver Nuggets the other day. Denver ended up winning that game 122-105, if I remember the score correctly. He'll be out for at least 2 to 3 weeks, and more than likely, we probably won't see him until after the All-Star break. And really the main thing that we're going to focus on here is, how does Anthony Davis's Achilles injury affect the Lakers' title chances at this point? Now, for me, I kind of look at this 2 ways. In the short term, I think they're definitely going to be affected by not having Anthony Davis on the court. The Lakers as a team have pretty solid depth, but they will miss AD's defensive presence. So they will have to rely a little bit more on Marc Gasol, and that's not the best thing to rely on at this point, just because Marc Gasol is getting older. He's not as agile or not as good as what he used to be. He's still productive in a smaller role here and there, but he is not anywhere near what he was back when he was in the prime of his career. So the Lakers' defensive numbers may take a hit over these next 2 to 3 weeks before the All-Star game takes place. Wouldn't surprise me if LeBron starts putting a little bit more effort and really starts taking the primary role of the team moving forward. So definitely expect LeBron to carry a little bit more weight on his shoulders until the All-Star break. And pretty much that's where I think the Lakers' title chances really kind of stand right now. I think if AD comes back within the next month or so, I still think that their long-term title aspirations are still intact. I mean, just to kind of put things into perspective, the Lakers have the second best record in the Western Conference right now. They're only behind Utah, and Utah has had the most impressive start up to the season compared to everybody else in the league. I did not expect Utah to be this good this early, and they are just playing outstanding basketball. And even despite that, the Lakers are only a game or 2 back of the Utah Jazz in the standings in the Western Conference. So to me, it doesn't really seem that the Lakers are really in any sort of trouble long term. Now, if AD is out for the rest of the year, then it's a completely different story. It definitely affects their title chances and really affects their chances to even get out of the West. But I don't suspect that happening. I think Anthony Davis will be able to come back within the next month or so. May take a couple games to get back into the groove of things when he does come back. But probably within a month and a half or so, the Lakers will just be fine. This team is pretty well built. I think with Frank Vogel coaching the team the way that he's been, I don't really suspect that they're going to really struggle or they're going to really fall off when Anthony Davis is not around on the team. And I kind of look at it like this because I've seen some takes about how Anthony Davis's injury affects the entire finals outcome. Because I remember on First Take, I saw Stephen A. Smith. He was saying that the Nets are now going to win the NBA Finals with AD being out. And look, there's a part of me that thinks that he's right because, look, the Nets are definitely my favorite to come out of the Eastern Conference. But I think it's too premature to even say something like that, to really agree with something like that, just because it's too prisoner of the moment. It's too premature. If Anthony Davis was out for the entire season, okay, maybe then I would really agree with Stephen A's point. I agree with it to a certain extent that I think that they're still going to make the finals. But I don't think that they're the overwhelming favorite moving forward because I don't think that AD is going to be out for 2 to 3 months. That's not the case here. It's probably only going to be a month. So I think it's just a little too premature to say something like that. And it largely depends on his health moving forward. If the Lakers come back and they still play well, even without AD, and then they bring him back and they even play better, then the Lakers are still probably the favorite to win the finals this year. I just don't trust the Brooklyn Nets defense. They don't have anybody to really protect the rim. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later. They may make a move to acquire a big man like Andre Drummond or Blake Griffin within the next couple weeks or so. But the thing with the Nets is that they're so reliant on KD, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving to carry the entire weight of the team. Because those three guys, in Kevin, Kyrie, and James, they have to score at least 100 to 120 points a game. So I don't know how the Nets supersede the Lakers as the favorite to win the entire finals at this point, just because AD is out for a couple weeks. I just think I think it's too premature on Stephen A's part to mention something like that. But I mean, we'll kind of see how it goes moving forward. It was just something that I could understand the point at the time that when he made it. I just think it's a little too early to say something like that, and I think it's a little too hyperbolic in the moment that we're in right now. But I mean, look, we're only halfway through the season. There's still a lot of basketball left to be played, and really the intensity of the regular season won't start ramping up until after the All-Star break anyway. So we've got about, I believe, 45 games left to go. A lot of basketball left to be played, and I don't think that we've seen the Lakers' best form yet, and I don't think that we've seen the Nets' best form yet, and that will probably reveal itself over these next couple weeks or so. But that'll pretty much wrap up all of the news focused and pertaining to Anthony Davis. Hopefully he comes back from this injury sooner rather than later. And then we'll focus on the trade rumors that are circulating around Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin at this moment in time. So both players are not playing on their respective teams at this current moment in time. Both of them are not really happy with the situation that they are dealing with. We'll start with Andre Drummond first. So with Drummond, the Cavs are focusing on Jarrett Allen being the team's main big man moving forward for their future. And it means that Andre Drummond is going to be on the chopping block and he's going to be on the move to a new team. So there are a few suitors that are vying for him at this current moment in time. You've got the Brooklyn Nets, the Toronto Raptors, and the Dallas Mavericks. They are all interested in possibly acquiring him. And all three of these teams could use Andre Drummond just because all of these teams really suffer from, really their defense suffers to a large extent because they don't have somebody that can protect the rim and then just get rebounds. Someone like Andre Drummond would be a perfect replacement to help them defensively. Now, the interesting thing with Andre Drummond is whether or not that he's going to be moved in the trade market or the buyout market. Because if you look at somebody like the Nets here, the Nets are probably going to have to acquire him through the buyout market because I don't think they have the requisite number of pieces to actually get a trade done with the Cavs. I mean, they traded half of their team away to acquire James Harden just a month ago. So there's going to have to be an agreement between Drummond and how this whole situation is going to work out with his contract to buy him out. It's going to be interesting to see how that whole dynamic ends up working out if he ends up going through the buyout market. But I will say this: the Raptors and the Mavericks are in a far better position to trade for Drummond via trade because they actually have what I would say a decent amount of depth on their team to actually make a trade work here. And I can't really say that one team's in a better position than the other. I'm just saying that both of these teams, in the Raptors and the Mavericks, have a better number of pieces to actually give to Cleveland in a trade if they were actually to make that happen. So, I mean, I saw that Shams was reporting that the Raptors are in active talks to acquire Andre Drummond. Obviously, we'll see what happens over the next couple of days or so. I mean, he could be moved as early as this week. I think they're still probably going to work out some trade packages for him. So definitely expect the Cavs to start ramping up the trade propositions for Andre Drummond at this point. But it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. If it were up to me, I don't know why, I highly suspect that he's going to end up on the Nets. And if you really do add Andre Drummond to that team, I may have to reassess my opinion on the Nets being the odds-on favorite to be the finals favorite at this point. But we kind of have to see how it goes. It's just my gut feeling is that he's going to end up on the Brooklyn Nets at this current moment in time. But we'll see how it goes over these next couple of days or so. And then with Blake Griffin is in a very similar situation that Andre Drummond is in. He is not playing right now, and basically the Detroit Pistons and Blake Griffin have agreed to keep him out of the lineup until they find some sort of trade package that can send him hopefully to a title contending team at this point. So if you look at Blake Griffin at this point, look, he's clearly not the same player that he was when he was playing for the Clippers, when it was Lob City with him and DeAndre Jordan. Those days of Blake Griffin's career, they're long gone. Really, the major issue that Blake has been dealing with the last couple of seasons are injuries. And it's really pertained to his knee and his hamstrings. I believe he got surgery on his knee about a year and a half ago. And he just hasn't been the same since. He's really been struggling with Detroit. And Detroit is going through a major rebuild right now. And the Pistons are actually doing him a favor at this point by moving him because they know somebody of Blake Griffin's caliber shouldn't be subjected to a rebuild like this that's going on in Detroit. And they're going to move him hopefully to a decent team. So look, there are a few issues with Blake Griffin besides the injuries. It's the fact that he's getting paid a solid amount of money moving forward. I mean, this year alone, he's making upwards of $35 to $36 million this year, and then he's getting $38 million next year. That's definitely going to be a tough sell for some teams that are interested in Blake Griffin, either via trade or via buyout, similar to Andre Drummond. Now, there's definitely going to be suitors for for Blake Griffin moving forward. I don't mean to imply that there won't be. It's just that there may be a good chance that whoever picks up Blake Griffin, they may revert him to coming off the bench, or maybe just focus on him being a decent role player on the starting five. I think really the main thing that Blake has to focus on at this point is just getting back to 100% health. If he goes to a new team, possibly a title contending team, something like that can definitely revitalize Blake Griffin's career. I don't know if he's ever going to get back to what he was with the Clippers, but he could be a very serviceable piece moving forward. It really just depends if he can get back to 100% health at this point. And that is pretty much paramount for Blake at this point in his career. So, I mean, look, he needs to get out of Detroit. I mean, Detroit is really one of the worst teams in the NBA. They're not really going anywhere. They're not contending for titles anytime soon. And I think at this point, it's just best to get Blake Griffin out of there. And the Pistons are doing him a solid by getting him out of there and try to work out some sort of trade package to get him out of there. So the trade deadline is on March 25th. So the Cavs definitely have more than enough time to get a trade done with Andre Drummond. The Pistons also have the same with Blake Griffin. And I would expect that both of these players get moved probably within the next week or two. I think if it drags out a little bit longer, it'll really go to show that maybe the market isn't that great specifically for Blake Griffin. I think Andre Drummond gets moved first out of both of these two. I think because Drummond is still pretty active and he's actually been playing decent basketball with the Cavaliers this year. It's just Blake Griffin's injury and his contract to a certain extent are going to make it a little bit tougher to move him. But I do expect him to get moved at some point within the next 2 to 3 weeks. But with that said, we'll wrap up the conversation pertaining to Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond there. We'll move on to something that has really kind of been bothering me, specifically related to the GOAT conversation and how it pertains to Patrick Mahomes. So Patrick Mahomes, before Super Bowl 55, before they ended up losing to the Buccaneers last week, a lot of people, specifically in the media, were putting Patrick Mahomes on this pedestal as one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. Not only, I wouldn't even say greatest quarterbacks ever, one of the greatest players ever already. They were putting him in the GOAT conversation already. Look, for me, this is not an indictment on Patrick Mahomes. Let me be clear about that. The main issue that I have here is people asking stupid questions on ESPN and Fox, like, can he catch up to Brady as the GOAT down the road? My point to the media is, don't put Patrick Mahomes on a pedestal that he hasn't earned yet. That pedestal that I'm referring to is putting him up against Brady and putting him up in the same class as Brady already. Look, Mahomes is phenomenal. He's been sensational since he's come into the league. He's been one of the most electrifying quarterbacks in the league. And to me, he probably is the most electrifying quarterback that I've ever seen. But look, he just finished his third year as a starter with the Chiefs. He has 2 Super Bowls. I mean, he's been to 2 Super Bowls. He's won one of them. He's got a Super Bowl MVP. He's got a regular season MVP. And he's arguably off to the best start that a quarterback has ever had in NFL history. That is where the conversation with Patrick Mahomes should end, point blank. You have to let this guy play his career out, and then we'll assess his legacy down the road. Look, Brady earned the greatest of all time title because of the work that he put in. He's been playing extremely competent football for over 2 decades. He's gone to 10 Super Bowls. He's won 7 of them. He's won 3 regular season MVPs. He's on pace to basically own all of the statistical records in the NFL, specifically related to the quarterback position, just because that he's been so consistent for over 2 decades. And for somebody like Brady, it's unprecedented that a player in the NFL has had that much success in their career, such as Brady. Brady has more titles than all the teams do. Brady has more Super Bowls than the Steelers, the Patriots, and the 49ers to boot. And that level of success by one player will probably never be replicated again. Now, is there a chance that Patrick Mahomes could achieve similar success in the NFL, similar to Brady? Absolutely. I'm not going to disregard that. Patrick Mahomes has been sensational to start his career. But there's a thing that I think a lot of people focus on, and that's the potential of Patrick Mahomes. Where can he go with his career? And I think sky's the limit for him. I think more than likely Patrick Mahomes will win multiple Super Bowls and probably earn multiple MVP awards in his career. But you can't put him in the GOAT conversation yet. I think it's a disservice to the actual phrase, the GOAT. And it really does water down the term if you're putting in Patrick Mahomes in the same class as Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes has not had the career that Tom Brady has had yet because he's only been in the league for 4 years. You have to let him achieve these milestones as far as Super Bowls, MVPs, passing records as his career goes on. He's in the infancy of his career. He has a lot of football left to be played. And I'll tell you this. If you look historically, specifically recently, a lot of the quarterbacks that had really good starts to their careers, they didn't even get back to the Super Bowl in their prime of their careers and in the latter part of their careers. You could look to somebody like Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers won, I believe, in 2010 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Since then, he has not been to a Super Bowl since. There have been multiple chances of them to go to the Super Bowl. They've had a couple chances in the NFC Championship game, and they haven't succeeded. They had this year against Tom Brady and the Bucs, and they were at home, and they couldn't beat the Bucs. And that was a prime opportunity for Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers to get back to the Super Bowl, and they just couldn't do it. Not only him, you look at somebody like Drew Brees. Drew Brees won his first Super Bowl, I believe, in 2009. Had a Hall of Fame career, will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Only got to one Super Bowl and never got back to it. Unfortunately for him, he had a really good chance to get to the Super Bowl a few years ago when they were playing against the Rams in the Superdome. If they didn't get that horrendous no call for pass interference against the Rams, probably would have gone to the Super Bowl that year, but it didn't work out that way. Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger's won 2 Super Bowls. One in 2005 and then in the 2008 season. He's never been back to a Super Bowl since. So you have 3 Hall of Fame quarterbacks in this era, such as Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees, and Aaron Rodgers. They haven't been to a Super Bowl in basically a decade. Brady, on the other hand, has been to multiple Super Bowls, not only in the 2010s, but now starting in the 2020s as well. And Patrick Mahomes could be in a situation that is very similar to those players. Look, Patrick Mahomes is going to be fantastic for years to come. But there's going to be a point in time where he's going to have to be the predominant force to carry the Chiefs to a Super Bowl title. And that may come at the expense of somebody like Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill down the road. Those guys are not going to be on the team forever. And one of those guys may end up leaving because the Chiefs may not have the cap space to retain Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill on the same team. It may be just a force of circumstance that one of those guys end up going to a different team just because they may want to demand a better contract. So Patrick Mahomes is going to go through some changes in his career. He's going to go through multiple changes on the roster. And the one thing that I'm going to be really paying attention to with Patrick Mahomes down the road is how can he adjust from having targets like Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, who are absolute studs, they're first pro receivers and tight ends, but they're not going to be on the team forever. Brady has shown that he can go from one player to the other and be successful still. Can Mahomes do the same thing? I would like to think so, but time will tell as we move forward. It's just with Mahomes, look, Mahomes has been outstanding. He's been sensational. I can say that over and over and over again. But you can't put him in the GOAT conversation yet. He just hasn't accrued the level of success that somebody like Brady has had. And Mahomes has a long road to go. He has an uphill battle to even be remotely in this discussion of the greatest player ever, as Brady has essentially achieved in his career. But, I mean, I'm pretty much going to leave it at that with Mahomes. That'll pretty much wrap up the episode, you guys. There has been some news pertaining to Carson Wentz about possibly being traded in the next couple days or so. I mean, I'll hit on what I've seen so far pretty quickly. Pretty much the Colts and the Bears are the two primary teams that are going after Wentz at this point. But with Philly's kind of in a tricky situation here because they are not going to get the draft capital that something like the Detroit Lions were able to get back with Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford was able to get 2 first-round draft picks in return for him. It looks like Philly's not going to get any first-round picks back from either the Bears or the Colts in this situation. From what I've seen so far, is that most of these trade packages for Carson Wentz are mostly focusing on second-round draft picks and even later first-round draft pick and later round draft picks. There's no first-rounders in any of these trade packages that I've seen. And look, what these offers basically tell Philly is that Wentz is basically valued at what he's valued. He had a shoddy year last year, and outside of the one MVP season that he had a few years back, he's been an inconsistent player. And the draft packages that the Colts and the Bears are offering for Wentz show that extensively. So Philly's not in a great position here to make this trade. They don't have a lot of leverage here. But, obviously we'll find out more information over the next couple of days on whether or not that he does get traded, because I will think that at a certain point that the Eagles are going to pull the trigger on a trade here. It's just because I don't see him staying on this team long term. It's just, I think the relationship between the Eagles and Carson Wentz at this point, I've just gone to a point of no return. And I think the best case scenario for both parties is to just cut the ties and find success later down the road in both the Eagles situation and Carson Wentz as well. Because I just don't think it's going to work out in the long term between these two. I think it's pretty much over as far as I'm concerned. But with that said, you guys, that'll wrap up the episode. I want to thank you guys to tuning into the episode, whether you were watching it on YouTube, whether you were listening to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to your podcast. I definitely appreciate it. Hopefully later this week that we can have Kevin back on the podcast. I think you guys definitely enjoy the interaction that Kevin and I have on the episodes that we do. I know I certainly do. I would probably think that Kevin does as well. So hopefully we can get him on an episode later this week. Obviously, we'll keep focusing on Carson Wentz and the news that develops with him over these next couple of days. Same thing with Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin possibly being traded in the NBA. And then we'll go over anything else that pops up really in the NBA. Obviously, we've got baseball coming up in a few weeks. So Kevin and I will probably be talking about that as we get closer to the beginning of spring training. But that's pretty much it, you guys. Just once again, thank you guys for tuning in and listening or watching to the episode. And I will see you guys later.